Good. Hi. This is really weird just standing here, so just give me a sec to adjust my collection here. Thank you very much to the organizers. I want to say how amazing it is to see this theater full of the future of design. It's just so exciting, and congratulations on making this happen. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about road mapping. And I think you guys heard enough about my background, but I think one of the things that I'd like to share is that outside of work, this is where I like to be. I get my energy from the outdoors, and you can often find me on my bike or running in the woods or skiing with my family. I think it's really important to balance our work lives with our personal lives and to combine those things together. As Russell mentioned, my previous career was in psychology, and so I've always been really interested and motivated about why people do what they do, and that's online and offline. And I feel like I'm in this great space and user experience where I get to play in that all the time. So I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Habanero. We've been around for just over 20 years, and we're really passionate about helping organizations become better places to work. There's so much untapped potential I think in today's society, by helping people build exceptional careers and be engaged in what they do every day, and by helping organizations perform at a higher level. So that's what kind of inspires us to come to work every day. And we've brought some of you along on that journey. We've been really fortunate to hire and have people work at Habanero as co-ops and interns and graduates of the program. And we're just so impressed with the SFU program over the years. And those people have been able to see why Habanero has been on these awesome lists like the Globe and Mail, top places to work for the last 6 years. I mean, for a little company that could, we've been #1 in Canada twice. So it's a pretty amazing team, and we're really focused on creating engaging teams. So in your interviews and in the future, think about us. So that's all I'm going to say about Habanero now. But what I do want to talk about is the concept of road mapping. And it may not sound very sexy, but I really do feel like the experienced designer could have this in your toolkit, and it could be your secret weapon for success. And I'm going to speak a little bit, I'm going to get to the outcome of what a roadmap is, but I would really like to spend a little bit of time talking about the process to get there and how it relies on our skill set as user experience designers or experienced designers to well, I'll explain a little bit about what the process is, but really it's kind of about bringing people along on that journey, and that we should be experts in that, and we can be collaborative and co-creative in that process. So has anybody started on a project with a bit of a fuzzy vision, or inherited a project maybe that was a bit of a, never really had a purpose and then sort of turned into a bit of a monster? Or if you had a solution that you loved and then it kind of dropped off and it doesn't feel like it fits the business or customer needs anymore, I think this is where a roadmap can really help ground your vision and direction. A lot of organizations handle these challenges a little bit like a game of whack-a-mole. So, sometimes evolution or the creation of projects or initiatives is basically an IT-driven approach. Like, hey, there's a new upgrade, there's some features we can turn on. Isn't that a great way to start any project? Or, you might have all these kind of random things that kind of come up that might sound familiar. My favorite is the CEO wants a blog. But, there's all kinds of things that can sort of drive strange direction in organizations, and that force us to, if we don't take a step back, we might actually make the wrong decisions because we're not connecting the dots about what we should be doing and why, and we're not building on a shared vision and a strategy. So roadmaps are a really great tool, I think, to help set that vision. And because they really, through the process of getting to a roadmap, you have these great outcomes that are the alignment of everybody on your team, that they're brilliantly aligned when we all agree that this is the direction that we're going and this is what we're going to do. The concept of ruthless prioritization is really important in our organization. Making sure that we're making choices, hard choices, about what we can do and at what level of fidelity that we can achieve things that's realistic and impactful. We also have, that sort of sense of we're all marching towards the same place, regardless of where we come from in the organization. And, business stakeholders, end users, employees, whoever you're focusing on, they feel like their needs are being met. And it gives you this sense of confidence that we have a direction, we can sort of share change within the organization. This is where we're going. We heard you. We're going to do that later. We're going to do that now. We can adjust and change as we go as more inputs are brought in, but it gives us a purpose and a point that we can all aim at. So alignment is a big theme. So I want to talk a little bit about how do you get to that endpoint of that roadmap. And I really want to focus on, starting with things that are familiar to us. So you get to a roadmap like you do with any other sort of project or initiative, and you use tools and techniques that are probably quite familiar. So empathy, obviously, you're starting with really understanding the people within organizations or customers who are interacting with organizations and their experience. And then that leads to gathering insights to make sure that you're solving sort of the right problem that you should be looking at. And then it's time to sort of get a little bit generative, start thinking about, how could we, what are all the ways that we could potentially address the challenges that we've uncovered through our empathetic research. And then, this is familiar, we get to an idea of like really sort of building and testing your first ideas, and then sort of testing it with people, and then working on it until you continue to get it right. So, this is a framework that's probably totally familiar, something that you can apply to anything and everything you do. And then today I'm going to talk about how we can apply this concept to the development of a roadmap. So empathy we're probably all familiar with, but just to make sure we're all grounded in shared vision on what empathy is, it's really the act of putting yourself in the shoes of another and caring and understanding and feeling for their experience. And so there's lots of ways that you can go through this empathetic process. You're probably familiar with many of them. But whether you're talking about a product, an application, a website, an intranet, whatever the solution or domain that you might be working in, you're really after understanding, what does their day-to-day look like? What are they doing? What are they accomplishing? What's holding them back? What are their pain points? That can be through observation, that can be through interviews, many, many different ways that you can get to the crux of that experience. You can complement that with analytics, with data, with employee surveys, with customer surveys, with usage data. My favorite is, sitting down with call centers, understanding, the feedback that they're getting through different channels, doing auditing social channels. So many other data that you can use to complement sort of that observational work. And then what are all the systems that people are using? They're supposed to be doing this. How are they actually achieving that? Are they working around the systems that they're in front of them? Are they using them? What are their shortcuts? What are all the different channels that they're working with? And then finally, I think it's really important to complement that whole empathetic picture by talking with stakeholders who are maybe decision makers, CEOs, leaders, department heads, to complement sort of the frontline kind of perspective of either customers or employees. Because, when you start projects, you sometimes get handed like a vision and strategy document, and they say, this is where we're going in 3 years. But there's so much context to that landscape that changes and that isn't necessarily represented in a document that, sitting down for 20 or 30 minutes with an executive or with a leader really, really can help you get to what's really happening in the company and help you compare that to what you're seeing with your sort of frontline folks. So together, I think all of those activities help you gain that empathy. But then what do you do with that information? I think, sometimes people use personas. We've actually moved away from personas and gone to using more empathy mapping approaches and journey mapping because I think it helps to unlock more stories and to help, unlock that empathy, to understand the highs and the lows of people's experiences and understand what people are doing, feeling, and thinking. And so, journey maps start to evolve as well, where while still empathetic, they're representing a bit of a broader experience, expanding that experience beyond just a single individual or a single component of a journey. It's a visual representation of that broader picture. And it also delves into the high and lows. This is an example from our employee journey at Habanero in terms of it's a very nonlinear process, and it involves a whole bunch of different phases from when you start to engage with Habanero as a potential employer and as you go through your career and when you might move on. That just happened automatically. I don't know what happened there. So then the next point is framing the problem. And so we go from empathy then into insight. And analyzing all the data is actually one of the most powerful parts of any sort of program or initiative that you might work on. It allows us, to come together and sort of make sense of what we've heard and seen. And, by grouping information, by sort of what people are doing, what they want to do, and it's really important that you don't do that in isolation. I think one of the most exciting trends of what's happening in user experience is the co-creation approach, where instead of, in the past, designers might have gone sort of into a room and done crazy sticky notes and kind of come up with a big sort of reveal. It's way more powerful to have your clients or your extended team, your product owners, they're right with you. Designers can empower those people to really take ownership over those findings, and it becomes a way more compelling and productive approach because you're not bringing them along later, you're going along together to develop those insights. And then, so one of the things that you can get from those insights is a set of guiding principles, which I think ground us in sort of the analysis. So if you're looking at your interviews, looking at your research, you've got your sort of themes and things that you're seeing, opportunities, how do you distill those down into a set of principles that ground your decisions moving forward? Everything else you'll do moving forward comes back to these principles about the experiences that you want to create. And so guiding principles create this sort of shared vision, and they help to guide those priorities in the roadmap. These are sort of some examples. We often create sort of a visual reference or iconography around principles to put into a roadmap. This was for a provincial organization that really wanted to, this sort of assigned sort of symbols in the roadmap and helped for that team to come around a shared understanding that they were about transformation, that they were Alberta-wide, that they were about high-performing teams and getting the right information to people at the right time and to be recognized as an award-winning employer. So, we'll see these again in the presentation, but guiding principles are an essential part of distilling down your insights and your future direction. Next step in developing into the roadmap is sort of ideation and start determining ways that you can see a way forward. Sometimes, depending on the solution, we might start with sketching and that kind of thing, but really on a roadmap, what we're looking at are ideas and concepts. So we use idea cards. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them and using them to sort of capture sort of experiences or functionality. And what we do is we kind of, summarize what is this concept, what is this idea. Sometimes we do it, we have sketches of that experience. And we'll start to indicate so that we can sort of do apples to apples comparisons across different concepts that we might be implementing. And these can change. Like for this particular project, these were the ones that were important. That's the thing about sort of road mapping and sort of these kind of strategies is there's no one size fits all. But for this particular one, we were interested in what was the business impact of some of the opportunities in front of us. How much of their organization could they affect? So how big is the audience? Sorry, it's a little bit washed out, but there would be small, medium, large of each of these. And then, how much effort by the organization to be able to get there. So, we used sometimes the idea of sort of the pebble, rock, boulder approach. You could use t-shirt sizes, whatever it is. Just something at a glance that you can reference, so you can sort of say, this is something that's really big, this is something that's going to impact a lot of people, and this is something, that it's going to take a lot of effort for us to do, so we might prioritize it differently. And I wanted to talk a little bit about prototyping. We kind of understand what prototyping means in the sense of a product or a feature. In the case of a roadmap, prototyping, I kind of want to think of drawing on the idea of building the just right amount of features or functionality, and then building on that. So we kind of talk about it as staged wow. This is a concept that Brandon Schauer introduced through Adaptive Path, the idea of the cupcake. So you only get one chance to delight people, and so you really need to be careful with your solution in terms of what are you going to do and do well. I think the temptation for a lot of organizations is to create this, to do, say, 10 amazing things in their first release, but they've sort of spent all of their time, effort, money on building sort of a bland cake that they didn't have time for filling, they didn't have time for icing. And when people come to it, it's kind of gross. Anyone can build a bland cake. It's not really very special. The model that we prefer to go with is the cupcake model, where you're kind of looking at the concept of starting with experiences with something small and desirable and whole, and then moving and evolving that based on what you learn and what you've planned through your roadmap, and getting to the next sort of level that's actually a fully formed, desirable next level. In this case, the cake with some more frosting and maybe a candle. And then you can eventually move on into your, three-tiered, extra icing, extra filling kind of approach. That way you get a great experience that sets you apart all the way along, rather than waiting for that sort of distinction down the road. And so the roadmap allows you and your team to sort of decide together and prioritize, what are you going to do now and what are you going to do later? And you do those alongside your guiding principles, and you can, assign sort of where things go, and you can talk about it and co-create as a team, how are we going to do this? How does this impact our organization? Is this the right thing to do now? And so you can imagine, our fully formed, awesome cupcake, this is our first release. And then some of the ideas from this start to shape what's going into your roadmap. You've got for release items or your experiences that you're trying to create. You've got your value to the employee. You've got your guiding principles that allow you to come back and see which ones are most aligned, and to have that constant discussion. How does this experience support the direction and the experience we want to create through our guiding principles? And that helps form your roadmap. And we always have people doing this together. I can't say that enough. Wherever you can, collaborate and co-create. And lastly, this is sort of what a completed roadmap can look like. I've seen them as like sort of beautifully crafted, InDesign, Illustrator things that are just sort of these pristine concepts that never get touched once they've been created. And so we have a completely opposite approach to that. We build our roadmaps in Excel, and we do that for ownership. Because if, as a consultant, we deliver something that can't be changed or adapted or owned by, the people who are actually going to be responsible for moving this forward, it's useless. So, but you can still print these out big. These are so powerful when they're up on a wall and you've sliced them up and you can move them around and you can get feedback. You can run and facilitate sessions. This is sort of the awesome part of getting this in front of people. But a roadmap for us has a lot of different components to it. It sort of indicates what are the features or experiences that we want to create. What's the value? Could be to the employee if it's an internal initiative, or to the customer. What does it look like to the business? How are we going to measure it? What do we need to do in order to support it? And these could be things like communication activities, change management activities. Do we need new roles or new people? These are not simple decisions, and we need to make sure that we can communicate the impact of our choices. Appetite for change is a really interesting one, because you can have all of the best ideas in the world, but if people don't want to take it on, this is the culture side. This is the ability to bring people along. And if you're doing it right, actually the change towards any of these new sort of features or functionality or experiences, it starts as soon as you start with your empathetic research, because you're bringing people through that change. They're affected by that change. But you need to be talking about it. And so from our perspective, as I mentioned, you can change any of this, make it right for you, but there are so many components that come together, and really the secret sauce here is the fact that you're sharing them, they're visible, you're doing it together, and you're having the hard conversations around priority and trade-offs and decisions. And so that is the sort of why I feel like getting to this point and this outcome is really powerful. Oh, and look, last one. And there's your guiding principles there, so you can visually reference what they look like. And here's a piece that I quite like, is that because this is just representing a couple of experiences, this is a really wide experience that we're breaking down into phases. And so that's where our ruthless prioritization, alignment with principles, and consideration of all these other factors makes a roadmap this multidimensional change management communication tool. But it doesn't matter if you don't test it with people. Just like with software, you need to get this in front of people. and get feedback. So these could be facilitated sessions, like I said. You can get sticky notes, you can get it, just tear it apart, validate it, and learn from it. And once you get your release into the market, or whatever it is that you're doing internally, or evolving your product, you need to be changing this all the time. You need to be refining it based on what you've learned through analytics and so on. Lastly, I just wanted to give you a roadmap. So if you're interested, take a picture, write that down. That particular URL will take you to a direct download to an Excel version of one of our roadmaps. So road mapping is now not your not-so-secret weapon. I hope you can use it. You can use it to develop alignment, to prioritize and focus on the highest value activities in any particular project that you're working on, to develop and communicate a shared vision, and to help you be really grounded in knowing what direction you're going and what's coming next. So start with empathy and go from there.